Hello and welcome to the Silverstripe screencast. In this episode, we're going to be talking about ModelAdmin, and specifically, we're going to create a property object that will drive most of the content in our application, and we'll add a management interface for it in the CMS using ModelAdmin. So what are we going to talk about here? Well, first we'll just do a brief introduction of what ModelAdmin is and when you use it and why. Then we'll do a quick overview of the classes that make up the CMS architecture and how they work together. Next, we'll build a standalone data object, which is goes hand in hand with ModelAdmin, and we'll create a ModelAdmin interface for managing it. And then we'll customize ModelAdmin a bit, and finally we'll add the data to our template. All right, what is ModelAdmin? Well, in the last several lessons, we talked a lot about data object content versus page content. So just to recap really quickly, when content represents an entire page, which is to say it's the layout variable in that page template, we subclass page and manage all of that content in the site tree. When content is just part of a page, but it merits its own editing interface, we use data objects. We looked a lot at data object-based content in our regions page. While each region object is part of a page, it needs its own editing tool. It wouldn't make sense to manage all that structured and repeating content in one field. So that all works great when data object content is hosted on a page. But what about more generic content that is used all over the site and doesn't really belong to any specific parent? You might have a store that manages products or a micro-lending site with many projects. This type of content really merits a dedicated management console in the CMS. So binding it to a page would be both confusing for the content author and it would add unnecessary complexity to your data model. Another example is content that you want to manage in the CMS that is never displayed to the public. Think about a business that manages a vast list of customers and orders. That type of content is only visible to admins, and binding it to a page doesn't make any sense. What we're really talking about here is the idea of standalone data objects. They're free-floating in our system, and they're managed but not bound to any specific hierarchy. For this type of content, we use ModelAdmin. When we create a ModelAdmin interface, we get a new top-level section of the CMS that lives among pages, files, security, etc., and it's dedicated to managing content per our specification. Great thing about ModelAdmin is that you can get up and running really fast, and customizations come fairly cheap. So before we start writing code, let's take a step back a bit and look at the bigger picture of how the CMS is architected and how that relates to ModelAdmin. So every top-level page you use in the CMS, that is pages, files, security, reports, settings, etc., these are all subclasses of left and main. Left and main is kind of the matriarch of the entire CMS. It oversees and handles everything from permissions to generating edit forms to loading CSS and JavaScript, request negotiation, and even saving and deleting records. So all of that said, the primary job of this behemoth class is to provide a secure user interface that contains a left section, like the site tree or a search form, and a main section, which is often an edit form. I know you're probably wondering, based on that, how did they come up with the name left and main? If you can think of it, please let me know as soon as you can figure out, because it's been puzzling me for years. So on a side note, I've always been quite intrigued by the name because having a controller that describes the layout is so antithetical to MVC. In newer versions of Silverstripe, I think this ideological conflict must have had an effect because in the codebase, the left part of left and main is now called tools, which is much more appropriate. So perhaps someday, left and main will be dethroned by its successor, tools and main, but for now, we'll enjoy the not so aptly named juggernaut of the CMS and take advantage of everything it has to offer to us. So any subclass of left and main will automatically get added to the main menu of the CMS. All you have to do is provide templates that define its main section and another that defines its tools section. ModelAdmin is an example of a class that does just that, and it makes a lot of assumptions about what we want in both sections, so it's supremely easy to get started. Now, as I said before, in this tutorial, we're going to tackle the main content type in our application, and that is the property object, which represents any given holiday rental that an end user can rent or that a property owner can let out. The property object will undoubtedly continue to grow with our application, but for now, we're just focused on giving them a home in the CMS. So let's keep it simple for now. Let's just give this object all the fields it needs for its representation on the home page. So looking at the home page, let's see what fields we're going to need. First, we're going to need the price per night. We'll need a photo. We'll need a title of the property. We'll need to identify its region. And then at the bottom here, we see we've got the number of bedrooms and the number of bathrooms. Further, we know that these properties that are displaying on the homepage must have some special attribute assigned to them, because obviously we wouldn't be displaying potentially thousands of properties on the homepage. So we're going to need to filter these out somehow. So let's add a featured on homepage field as well. So I'm going to start building the property data object here. And I'm just going to define all those fields. The region is going to be a has1 because we already have regions. The primary photo, we've seen that before. We'll call that an image. And I'm using primary photo because I think that there's going to be more images on the detail page, and you probably want to have a special field to define what shows on the home page. In my getCMS fields function, I'm going to break it up into two tabs. We've got the main tab, which is going to contain most of the fields. And then I'll add a separate tab for photos because potentially we're going to be dealing with a lot of photos, so we want those on their own tab. We will limit the upload to just images and then set the folder name as well. So most of this is straightforward, but let's look at a few things that might be jumping out at you as kind of peculiar. So we have a currency field type in our DB array, and we're using a currency field in our field list. These two work nicely with each other to provide the correct formatting for currency and to ensure that the value is preceded by a currency symbol. So just a good idea whenever you're dealing with prices, use currency instead of an integer or a decimal. We have a drop-down field for the regions, and we've used region ID as the name for that drop-down field. So why in this case do we have to explicitly append ID? Other fields like upload field just accept the name of the has1 field, like photo, without the requirement of using the exact database field photo ID. So this is a bit confusing for sure, but keep in mind that a drop-down field doesn't always save to a has1. It could just as well be saving to a text field. Other form fields that work only with data relationships know how to resolve the name of a relationship to a database columns. But the drop-down field is multi-purpose and it's fairly data model agnostic, so that's all that's going on here. We just need to be a little bit more explicit with drop-down field. Now also on drop-down field, I'm invoking setSource. There's nothing too crazy going on here. This method just tells the drop-down field what options are available in its list. You can also provide this list as the third argument to drop-down field. But I find that it makes the code more readable to assign it in a chained method. This one's a little funky. You've got ArrayLib value key. So like checkbox set field that we saw in a previous tutorial, drop-down field takes an array where the keys are the data that will be saved when the option is selected, and the values of the array are the labels that will be displayed for each option. Oftentimes they're the same. The ArrayLib value key function just mirrors the keys and values of an array. Which gets to our next thing, the range function. This is a simple PHP function that just generates an array containing a range of elements. It doesn't have to be numeric. You can use range AC, and that will give you an array containing ABC. So what's going on here is we've defined a range and we've mirrored it using value key so that the values are 1 through 10 and the labels for each option are 1 through 10. This setEmptyString method, this is the default data list option for our list. We don't want the dropdown to default to the first region listed because that would just be an arbitrary decision, right? We want the user to explicitly declare the region that the property is in. And if they don't do that, there should just be no region. For bedrooms and bathrooms, I don't really feel like we need the empty string because it's fine if those just default to 1. Okay, so now that we've got all that sorted, let's run dev build. We'll see that we get some new fields. So now we'll create the ModelAdmin interface that will give us a place to hang all these property records. A basic ModelAdmin interface is exceedingly simple to create. Let's do that now. So I'm going to create property admin, and I'll just extend ModelAdmin. And all I have to do is define 3 static variables. Let's walk through these one by one. The menu title, this is the title that will appear in the left-hand menu of the CMS. The URL segment is the part of the URL that will follow admin to access this section of the CMS. In our case, the path to our ModelAdmin interface would be admin/properties. Managed models, this is an array of class names that will be managed by ModelAdmin. They should all be data object subclasses. Now each ModelAdmin can manage multiple models. Each one is placed on its own tab across the top of the screen. And in this case, we just have one, but we'll be adding more down the track. So we've created a new class. We need to run a flush. Let's do that and go into the CMS and see what we've got now. You should see a new Properties tab on the left. Let's give it a try, and we'll just go ahead and add a few property records here and make sure it's working okay. So now that we've got a simple editing UI, we can start to customize it a bit and make it more powerful and user-friendly for our content editors. We'll start with what we've seen before. We can use summary fields to give us control over what fields display in list view. So let's do that now on our property data object. I'll display the title. I want to get the region title, the price per night, and we'll show if it's featured on the home page. So notice we can use the dot-separated syntax to invoke methods on each field. We know that region is a has-one, so getting the region ID is useless. We instead want to get the region's title, which is much more friendly. When we use region.title, it translates to something like this region title. We also want to take advantage of the currency field type that we used. Remember that it too returns an object. Most of the time it just renders itself as a string, but we can invoke methods on it. In this case, the nice method, offered by the currency class, gives us a nicely formatted price with a currency symbol, commas, and decimal values. And Boolean fields are actually quite generous as well. We can invoke the nice method on a Boolean to return a human readable value of yes or no, and those values will be translated per the user's locale, so there's no English bias there. So right now the tab in our properties section of the CMS is using a pretty generic icon. If we have several of these custom admins, they won't be easily distinguished, so let's give this admin a custom icon in the menu. So you're going to need to download the assets for this lesson if you haven't yet. Go into that archive and place the property.png file in mysite/icons. So why not put that image in our theme? Because images are part of a visual part of the site, and you would think that images might go in your theme. Well, keep in mind that the CMS is not theme aware, so you should avoid mixing the two. If you ever change your theme, that should have no effect on the icons that appear in the CMS. Anything that relates to your code should be kept in your project directory. So I'll define menu icon, and I'll provide a path relative to the project root, and we'll run flush because I changed the static variable, and we do have a new icon. All right, let's talk about the search form now. Just like the fields displayed in list view, the fields that appear in the search form are also customizable by the class definition of the data object. All we have to do is define a private static variable called searchable fields. By default, the data object will provide the same fields that are specified in summary fields, but that may not be what you're looking for. In this case, we have price per night in our summary fields, but that's not necessarily a field we want to search on in the admin. So let's explicitly declare a searchable fields array to list what we want. So I'm going to just add title, region title, and featured on homepage, because those are three fields we might want to filter by. We'll run the flush, and we'll see that we have a new search form that lets us search by the title of the property and the title of its associated region. Now, searching by region title is nice, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for this to be a free text field, since our regions are a known list. It really should be a drop-down that allows us to choose from all the regions that have been added to the database. That way, the user doesn't have to worry about making a spelling error and has a better idea of what's in the system. In order to do that, we'll have to write some executable code which can't be placed in a static variable assignment. So we'll change the private static searchable fields to a public function searchable fields. And that's going to be expressed in lower camel case instead of underscore case. Now the searchable fields function has to return an array, just like the searchable fields static variable is an array. And you'll see that I'm just using, all the keys are going to be the fields that we're searching on, and then I'm mapping that to an array of metadata that's going to define how that search field works. So as you can see, we need to be much more explicit about how we want our search form configured. Each field we include has to be mapped to an array that contains three keys. So the first one, filter, This is the type of filter that should be used in the search. For a full list of available filters, you can look in framework/search/filters, or you can go to the API documentation on search. Now for this title field, we just want a fuzzy match, so we'll use the partial match filter. Since regions are filtered by ID, we want that to be an exact match filter. And since featured on homepage is a Boolean, that can also be exact match. The title is a really simple one. That's just the label that will identify the search field. Now for field, you have three different options here. First, you can provide a string representing the form field class that you want to use, as we did with title. We just said text field. Now if you want something more complex, you can use a form field object. In this case, I've instantiated a drop-down field, much like the one we used in our getCMSFields function. Yet another option is just to leave this undefined, and the data object will ask the field type for its own default search field. And we did this with featured on homepage. Every field type, currency, Boolean, date, etc., knows how to render its own search field. In this case, Boolean gives us a nice drop-down of three options: yes, no, or any, which is perfect. You might wonder why not a checkbox field for a Boolean? Well, a checkbox field has to be either on or off. It wouldn't allow us to opt out of that filter. We would either be asking, show me all the records that are featured on homepage, or show me records that are not featured on homepage. But if we just want that field to be ignored, there's no way to do that with a checkbox. It's binary. So we'll have three options here for our featured on homepage dropdown. Very nice. Now this time we didn't modify any static variables, so we don't have to flush. Let's just refresh and give the search form a try. And it feels a little better, doesn't it? Now at this point, it's probably a good idea to find that import.sql file that came with the lesson assets and run that on your database. It contains a lot of sample properties that will fill out your database and give you some data to work with. If you're using mmap, you can access phpMyAdmin and run the import there. If you're not clear on how to do that, you can find many tutorials online on how to help you import SQL into phpMyAdmin. If you're not using phpMyAdmin, you can follow the instructions in the How to Use This Guide article in this lessons section. Now this step is optional, but it's a good idea. It will help keep us on the same page, and it will save you the time of creating dummy records over and over again. All right, so let's add some properties to the template now. This should be pretty simple. We're going to write a method in our homepage controller that just gets all the featured properties. So we'll say property get. We'll filter by featured on homepage is true. And the design dictates that there's only 6 of these showing on the homepage, so we'll limit it by 6. In a previous example, we added an argument to this function that allows the user to specify the limit on the template. That's a really good idea. I'm just doing it a different way for now, but feel free to, if you want to have the limit come in through the argument signature of this function, you can do that. It's just up to you. So now we'll loop through all that data and we'll get it on the template. I'm just going to loop through featured properties, and I'll call the title, the region.title. Primary photo, we'll crop that image so that it fits in the space it's supposed to. We'll invoke the nice function on price per night. And then lastly, we'll just put the bedrooms and bathrooms. You may have noticed that we deliberately added a non-existent method link to the property. That's okay. It will just get ignored for now, but in the future, we will add that method and we won't have to come back here and make that update. So reload the page and see your featured properties, and everything looks good like it's supposed to. That is all for this lesson. Thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below.